Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome back into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. This is the Crunch Time 2024 Team Autopsy Report. And folks, we have one of college football's most historic programs on the autopsy table to break down over the next half hour. If you're watching on YouTube or on our Twitter handle at Crunchtime VIP, want to say thank you very much. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, want to thank you for joining us as well. Whether this is your first episode or you've been with us throughout the entire offseason going through all of these teams thus far. Folks, a lot of things to unpack here about this Oklahoma Sooner program. So let's go ahead and get right into it, because from what we've seen over the 3 years as the tenure of Brent Venables, since he's become a first-time head coach, so we knew that there would be a learning curve there. And you're talking about one of the best defensive minds in college football. His 3 years at Oklahoma in their first season in the Southeastern Conference, this team went 6-7. 3 consecutive bowl losses. That's not so much what we're looking at, but I'm looking at an overall record in 3 years of 22 wins, 17 losses. Folks, that's a winning percentage of 56%. At a program like Oklahoma, that's not acceptable. This team, and rightfully so, sees itself as one of the top-tier programs in college football. Thus far, under head coach Brent Venables, that has not been the case. So let's take a look at what happened in 2024? And is the arrow pointing up for Coach Brent Venables, or is the arrow pointing down? And does he find himself firmly on the hot seat there in Norman? As we always like to do, let's start with the betting total first. Back in June, season win total for the Sooners was 7.5. We know this team only got to 6 wins. That is a game and a half off of that number, so would have needed to get to 8 to surpass that, and that was DOA early on based on how they performed. All right, let's talk about our in-season composite win total. When you look at 3 very unique but very predictive statistical data points, we actually had the Oklahoma Sooners at a 6.3. So we were basically spot on with the Sooners once we got in season and started collecting some of that great data. All right, let's take a look at the schedule. There are 2 very unique data points, and we value both of them. So we don't just look at one and disregard the other. We take a look at both. As far as your strength of schedule, basically, how was your opponent's power ranked using our data? And when you look at the Sooners, the 5th toughest schedule in college football last year from a pure power ranking standpoint, 0.068. This team was absolutely tested week in and week out. And as I told Sooner fans, welcome to the Southeastern Conference. Baby, this is no longer the Big 12. You're no longer a big fish in a small pond. Now you got some great white sharks that you got to swim with. Now, let's take a look at their strength of record. Now, basically, your strength of record, the only portion of that you really have any control over is your non-conference. Do you really test yourself out of conference, or do you kind of get a bunch of layups and really try to padding that win total, but, weakening your strength of record? Well, the Sooners did not do that, because when you're looking at a 0.652, they had the 6th toughest strength of record there. So once I get into the schedule here momentarily, we'll take a look and see just what the win totals look like for Oklahoma's opponents. And you start off in the non-conference with a 3-9 Temple team. Houston was 4-8. Tulane 9-3. And now we step up in weight class once they get in the conference. Tennessee was 10-2. Auburn was 5-7. Texas playing that great rivalry game there in the Cotton Bowl every year, 11-1. South Carolina was 9-3. Ole Miss was 9-3. Then they stepped back out of conference for their final non-conference game against Maine. Missouri was 9-3. Alabama was 9-3. Impressive win there. We'll talk about that later. And then 8-4 against LSU. So like I said, once they stepped into conference play, they really were tested week in and week out. Now, let's talk about how good were the defenses that this Oklahoma Sooner team went up against in the 2024 season. We'll use a baseline number of 68 because that's how many Power 4 teams we have in college football in 2024. ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, Notre Dame. So using that baseline of 68, Houston was the 26th best defense in college football for us last year. Tulane was 60th. Tennessee was 3rd. Auburn 39th. Texas, number 2 defense for us last year. South Carolina was 7th. Ole Miss was 4th. Do you hear the gauntlet, folks, that this offense had to go up against week in and week out? We're still not done. Missouri was 20th. Alabama was 6th. LSU was 29th. 10 of their 12 regular season opponents were inside of that top 68. Folks, this team was absolutely tested from an offensive standpoint week in and week out. If you look at the average power ranking for their opponents when we exclude Maine out of the FCS, 28. You're talking about a team that would have been barely outside of the top 25 from a defensive standpoint, and that's what Oklahoma's offense was going up against week in and week out. Whoa. Okay, with that in mind, now let's take a look at their offensive metrics here and really do a deep dive here. I'm going to give you 3 data points here for the offense, and I'll just give 2 for the defense. The NCAA average for that category, what the Sooners were in that category, and then when we adjust Oklahoma's numbers based on their opponent. So we're not just looking at the raw number, we're looking at an adjusted number here. So points per game, the average team scored 28 points per game. The Sooners were at 24.3. When we adjust for opponent, that goes up slightly to 26 points per game. So about 2 points off of the average team last year in offense. That is far below what we saw under Lincoln Riley when he was the head coach there at Oklahoma. More offensive centric versus Brent Venables being more defensive centric. Okay, the passing game. Let's go to passing first. 227 yards per game was the average. Oklahoma was at 168 yards per game. But when we adjust for opponent, once again, goes up because of the quality of defenses that they face to 176 yards per game. So about an 8-yard, let's call it 9-yard per game improvement there. When we look at the run game, this is something that Oklahoma has hung their hat on for 70 plus years, being able to control the line of scrimmage and dominate you with that run game. Did not see that again this year with Oklahoma. Average team about 160 yards per game. The Sooners were at 155. However, when we do that adjustment for an opponent, the Sooners should have been about 180 yard per game rushing attack last year, an improvement of 25 yards. So the raw accounting stats do not really show how good this offense was based on the caliber of defenses that they faced. Now, total offense per game, 387 yards per game. Sooners were at 323, but once again, when we do that adjusted number for opponent, goes up to 357. So they were actually 34 yards better than what their true numbers showed on the surface. Let's take a little bit deeper dive here because these numbers are absolutely going to blow you away. Good and both bad. Average team last year, drives ending with a score, either a touchdown or field goal, 40% of the time. The Sooners were at 41.7, so slight improvement over the average. The average team drives ending with a touchdown, 29%. The Sooners were at 27.1%. Had a difficult time putting the ball in the end zone. And then third down conversion, 39%. The Sooners were at 39%. So basically, they were an even team as far as being able to convert on third downs. That's not good. And why that number is not good, listen to the number of sacks that Oklahoma gave up last year. The average team gave up about 24 sacks during the regular season. The Sooners gave up 46, more than double what the average team gave up last year. That is a problem for any offense to sustain any kind of consistency there. Compound that with committing 20 turnovers. That's how you have the kind of record that you have there. Now, let's take one more deep dive into their metrics here. We call these our 3 E's. How effective, how explosive, and how efficient was your offense last year? As far as being effective, Oklahoma was 89th. As far as explosive, they were 110th. Could not find a big play to save their souls last year. And then as far as being efficient, they were 76. The Oklahoma Sooners were our 94th rated offense in college football. I can't recall an Oklahoma offense being this bad in decades. That's a problem, especially when you're in now a big time conference there. If I had to bullet point this offense, I'm going to say the offense struggled, and they struggled big time in the passing game. So let's take a look at their quarterback in Jackson Arnold last year. Primary starter, we know that they rotated two quarterbacks, so I'm going to give you both of their numbers. I'm going to show you how below average from a data standpoint their play was. Had a lot to do with that poor offensive line. So I'm not throwing all of this at the quarterbacks, but Jackson Arnold, 10 games, completed about 63% of his passes, 1,421 yards, 12 touchdowns, 3 INTs. So we like the touchdown to INT ratio, but only 142 yards per game, passing 5.8 yards per attempt. Because of that poor offense, you couldn't push the ball down the field. Michael Hawkins Jr., more of a dual threat running back. In 7 games, he also completed about 63% of his passes, 783 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 INTs. His yards per attempt, 6.5. Again, could not push the ball down the field, 112 yards per game passing. So regardless of the quarterback, neither one of them could really push the ball down the field. But here's the biggest problem for me. When you're talking about a program like Oklahoma, who, if you look through their history, some of the best running backs in this game have worn that uniform. Their leading rusher from a yardage standpoint, Javonte Barnes, in 9 games, 112 attempts, 577 yards, 4.7 yards per rushing attempt, 5 touchdowns. I've seen a couple of really good Sooner running backs get that in 2 games. So that is problematic for this offense. Let's take a look at the defensive side of the ball, and this is where Brent Venables lives. So these numbers need to be eye-popping. Let's take a look and see if they were eye-popping. And first of all, let's talk about it. How good were the offenses that this Sooner defense went up against last year? We talked about the gauntlet of offenses. The gauntlet of defenses their offense had to go up against. Let's see if the defense had that same gauntlet. Well, right off the bat, 2 teams outside of the top 100 would say no. But let's see once we get a little bit deeper into the schedule. Tulane had the 33rd best offense for us last year. Tennessee was 26th. Auburn, 56th. Texas, 6th best scoring offense for us in college football last year. South Carolina was 19th. Ole Miss was 5th. Missouri was 53rd. Alabama was number 2. And then LSU was number 21. When you average those out, a little bit softer there. So an average power ranking of about 42. You're kind of, if you're trying to imagine how good of a defense that would have been on a week in and week out basis, you're talking about a defense that's probably on a 7-5 or 8-4 team with that kind of defensive production. So not nearly the same gauntlet that their offense had to go up against, but still a very challenging set of offensive opponents there. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to only give you these 2 numbers. I'm going to give you what their accounting stats show and then what it shows for our adjusted numbers. The Sooners gave up 21.6 points per game, but when we adjust that in the regular season, goes down a full touchdown to 14 points per game. That is an elite caliber defense there. As far as the passing yards per game allowed, 212 yards per game passing. When we adjust that for opponent, it goes down to 187 yards per game, an improvement of 25 yards. So it was already an average defense against the pass, but statistically they were a little bit better than that. And as far as the run game goes, 106 yards per game is what they allowed, but when we adjust for opponent, 99 yards per game. So elite rushing defense, it was actually even better than what the data shows. And then total offense, 318 yards per game. When we adjust that, it goes down to 287 yards per game, almost a 32-yard per game improvement over what their data shows. So this is why we like to do those adjusted numbers, is because we can actually paint a better picture of what this team looks like versus what their raw accounting stats show. Now, let's look at the adjusted numbers a little bit deeper. Oklahoma's defense only allowed their opponents to score either a touchdown or field goal 23.7% of the time. That's phenomenal. As far as opponents finding the end zone, 11.7% of the time. Once again, that's elite caliber defense. And their third down defense, still extremely good. 33% of the time is what their opponents were converting on third down. So Oklahoma was absolutely able to get off the field more times than not. As far as their sacks, we talked about how bad their offensive line and quarterback play was as far as not taking a lot of sacks. Defense had no problem, 32 sacks during the regular season. That is more than good enough to keep you in a lot of ball games, which they did last year. Their opponents on fourth downs, 7 out of 17, only 41% conversion rate there. Almost 12 percentage points better than the average team last year. And the Oklahoma Sooner defense did a really good job of forcing turnovers. 21 forced turnovers last year. Now, let's take a look at their 3 E's on defense. Remember how poorly I said their offense was? The absolute reverse with their defense. The 7th best effective defense last year. 13th best in not allowing explosive plays, and then 7th in efficiency on defense. The Oklahoma Sooners ended the regular season for us as the 9th best defense in college football. Folks, that's the way that you win a lot of games. If you want me to sum up this defensive performance in 2024 by Boomer Sooner, it is absolutely an elite performance there. And that's what you expect from one of the best defensive minds in this game in Brent Venables. Let's talk about the special teams quickly before I get to the coaching breakdown. Special teams was average, and the reason I say average because their field goal kicking was elite, 15 out of 18, therefore a 83% conversion rate. Just missed the one extra point in the games that we were tracking. And when you look at it, 5 punts per game, that's telling me your offense cannot sustain offense, and you're giving the ball back to your opponents more times than you really want to. When you think about it, about 11 to 12 possessions during a college football game, if you're punting 5 times, it's really hard to have any continuity on offense. 41.7 yards per punt. That's one of the worst in college football. We had them ranked 89th in that category. Was a +1 in the turnover differential. I talked about the great job that defense did of trying to get the ball back for their offense. Fantastic job there. This team was very disciplined under Brent Venables. Not a lot of penalties, only 5.1 penalties per game. So we like that about Coach Venables in the way he's leading this program. In one-score games, the Sooners were 2-1. So in tight games, the Sooners absolutely were able to get it done more times than not. However, against quality opponents last year, 9 such contests, Oklahoma was 3 wins and 6 losses. That's not good there. Okay, and then finally, defensive-minded coach, unsure about his offensive coordinator. Coach Brent Venables went for it on 4th downs about 13.5% of the time when faced with that situation. About 76 out of 144 qualifying head coaches last year. And it would make sense since they were 12 out of 25 converting on 4th downs, only 48% there. So that decision-making absolutely makes sense. Let's take a look at the offense and defensive splits as far as how this team looked in their wins versus their losses. And of course, we're going to start right there with the offense first. In their 6 wins, Boomer Sooner was absolutely rolling. 35 points per game, 169 yards per game, passing on 24 attempts, 7 yards per attempt, 10.8 yards per completion. So even in their wins, they're not pushing the ball down the field. For college football, you want that yards per attempt to at least be around 8, preferably about 0.5 yards per attempt. The yards per completion says it all. Even when they were getting the ball in the hands of those receivers, tight ends, and backs coming out of the backfield, 10.8, you're telling me right now, not a lot of yards after the catch were coming even in those wins. Now, the run game, 41 rushing attempts in their victories, 208 yards, 5.1 yards per rushing attempt, averaging about 65 plays per game. So that run game was able to control the pace of play there for 376 yards per game, 5.8 yards per play. Team averaged about almost 4 touchdowns per game and less than a full turnover per game. Run pass ratio in those wins, 63% run, 37% pass, 32% on third downs, 80% on fourth downs, and committed just to 4 turnovers. In the 6 losses, however, 13.5 points per game. The passing attempts go up by almost 7 attempts per game to almost 31. The yardage basically stays flat, 167 yards per game passing, 5.4 yards per attempt, 8.9 yards per completion. Folks, when they were losing, they were throwing more attempts, but not seeing any more production. Same can be said for the ground game. Again, about 40 attempts per game, but now in those losses, only 102 yards per game. Basically, their rushing totals cut in half in those losses. So Sooners, when they lost, could not run the ball at all. 2.6 yards per rushing attempt in those losses, 70 plays per game. So the plays per game go up about almost 6 plays per game. Total yardage, 269 yards per game, 3.8 yards per play. Basically about 1 touchdown per game to almost 3 turnovers per game. In those 6 losses, 16 total turnovers. That is definitely not how you win at this level in college football. Let's take a look at the defensive splits. I think we're going to see some radical swings there as well. In their 6 wins, this defense was absolutely elite, giving up just 12 points per game. Their opponents, 30 pass attempts per game, only 201 yards per game, 6.8 yards per attempt. Once again, their opponents could not push the ball down the field against this Sooner defense. Now, does tick up with the yards per completion, 12.1 in their victories. This rush defense was absolutely phenomenal. 35 rushing attempts is what their opponents were averaging for only 92 yards per game, 2.7 yards per rushing attempt, about 64 plays per game, 294 yards per game in total offense allowed, 4.6 yards per play. In those victories, the Sooner defense lights out on third downs. 34% conversion is what their opponents had, and they forced 15 turnovers. In those 6 losses, defense was giving up 31 points per game. Opponents attempting about 28 pass attempts per game for 224 yards, 7.9 yards per attempt, 12.2 yards per completion. 38 rushing attempts, so the rushing attempts go up slightly, but the rushing yardage really doesn't move the needle for me as far as this defense goes. Only allowed 119 yards per game, even in their losses, 3.1 yards per rushing attempt. Their opponents averaging about 343 yards in total offense, 5.2 yards per play. Almost 3 touchdowns allowed to 1 turnover per game there. Opponents converting 40% on third downs. And in those losses, the Sooner defense could only force 6 total turnovers. So we mentioned it, a little bit of a swing there. And I would venture to say that when you look at their offense their offense committing 16 turnovers, their defense only able to turn the ball over 6 times. That's a minus 10 differential. Easy to see how they lost those 6 games. Now, key statistical disparity between wins and losses, as I mentioned, the points per game, but really it's the yards per play on offense. 5.8 yards per play in their wins, 3.8 yards per play in their losses. So let's go ahead and get to the Sooners' final grade. The Oklahoma Sooners in 2024 will get a final grade of a C+. Why? What we talked about it. The struggles on offense can just not be ignored. The lack of pass protection was a major issue, and defensive success wasn't enough to overcome some of the issues that we saw on offense. The final verdict: the Oklahoma defense was championship caliber, but the offensive inconsistencies and lack of firepower prevented them from reaching their full potential. The Oklahoma Sooners 2024 season was a mixed bag as they showed moments of dominance but struggled in critical matchups. Offensively, the Sooners maintained their high-powered attack, but inconsistencies at quarterback and the inability to generate big explosive plays against top-tier defenses limit their ceiling quite a bit. Despite securing some key wins, Oklahoma fell short in pivotal games that would have solidified them as a contender in the Southeastern Conference. Close game execution was solid, but their turnover margin and sometimes third down efficiency proved costly in key moments last year. So in our final minute or so, I'm going to give you 3 keys here that the Sooners absolutely have to improve on in 2024. I want to say a quick hello to Mama Deb and all of our great Sooner fans. Thank you for all the support there, but we got to talk about keys to fix your Sooners in 2025. Key number 1, improve the pass protection. Too many sacks allowed. If your quarterback cannot set his feet and read through his progressions, I don't care who you got back there at quarterback, they're not going to be successful. So it starts up front with the offensive line and the quarterback playing on time and on rhythm. If I'm the offensive coordinator, I'm getting my butt out of 4 and 5 wide receivers, and I'm going back to old school Sooner football. Give me a fullback, give me a tight end, and let's go 21 personnel, and let's go rock some heads, baby. Key number 2, consistent quarterback play. Whoever the starting quarterback is going to be in 2025, they have to find some stability there to maximize their offensive efficiency. And key number 3, defense cannot be put in the situation that they were last year. This defense has got to create more negative plays and force more punts. I know they did a great job last year, but we're going to have to ask them to do even more this year. If the Sooners can focus on these key areas, the Oklahoma Sooners can position themselves to be a legitimate SEC contender in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 college football